Which gods are waiting for us in the cold abyss of the Norse realm? Which gods are going to give Kratos and Atreus a lot of trouble when God of War Ragnarok releases? And which gods do we absolutely need in God of War Ragnarok? Well, today I'm going to be answering those questions for you, but I'm not going to be alone. To help me out with this video and to make sure you have the best experience possible, I've asked Kaptain Kuba, the captain of God of War lore and theories, to help me out. Take it away, Captain.
Hey, how's it going, guys? Kaptain Kuba here, and thank you so much, Shayne, for having me over. This was long overdue. Now, guys, today we're going to be talking about which gods we're going to see / fight in God of War Ragnarok. This is a question the God of War community has always loved asking because conflict with the gods is at the very center of the story of these games. And with rumors suggesting that this next game will be longer than the previous one has to imagine that Santa Monica included a lot of these gods for Kratos and Atreus to interact with. That's why Shayne and I thought it was a good idea to leave out the gods we know for sure are going to be there and focus on the ones we don't. So with that out of the way, I'm gonna pass it back to Shayne so he can share with you guys the first god on our list.
Freyr, the ruler of Alfheim. Freyr is one of the leader of the Vanir tribe of gods alongside his sister Freya and his father Njord. In God of War, he is actually mentioned quite a few times, especially in Alfheim. We learn from Atreus' journal that Freyr is almost worshipped by the elves of Alfheim, and also built a temple in his honor. But he wasn't always so loved, especially by the Aesir. After the Aesir and Vanir War, Freyr actually wanted peace throughout the realms between the gods. And he taught the Aesir some of his satyr magic and how to grow and harvest crops. But the Aesir actually turned angry against Freyr because they couldn't use the satyr magic as well as him. So what did they do? So they captured, tortured, and set Freyr on... That's not funny. And set Freyr afire, while many of the Aesir were around and actually got really drunk. Freyr was able to escape his captivity, and no one knows where he is now. The elves believe that Freyr could possibly be back in his home realm of Vanaheim, while others believe that the Aesir recaptured him and he's being held in Asgard. In Norse mythology, Freyr is actually really well represented from the myths in God of War, except for the capturing and torturing and burning part. He rides a huge golden boar named Gullimbursty, has a ship that he can actually fold up so far that he can fit it in a bag, and has a awesomely magic sword called Sumarbrundr that can actually fight on its own. But he does not have this sword forever. He falls in love with a Jotun called Gurthur, who he sent his assistant Skirnir to ask for her hand in marriage multiple times. After a while, Gurthur finally agreed to be Freyr's wife, and for his service, he actually gave Sumarbrundr to his assistant. Even though he doesn't have his magical sword Sumarbrundr anymore, Freyr is a very formidable warrior, and we learn this from myth. Which in myth, he actually fought off the Jotun Beli with only an antler. But because he doesn't have his sword Sumarbrundr anymore, Freyr will eventually die to the fire giant Surtur during Ragnarok, which some believe that Surtur's sword is actually Sumarbrundr itself. So what can we expect when we cross paths with Freyr during God of War Ragnarok? I expect one Helheim of a hostile fight. Being the brother of Freya and the ruler of Alfheim, which we're not on good terms with either of them at this moment, I don't think Freyr is going to give us much courtesy. Being able to kill a Jotun just with an antler, he has to be a great warrior and put up one hell of a fight. Whether he has his sword Sumarbrundr in God of War is kind of still a mystery at this point. But I don't know about you, but I want to take on the god that has Sumarbrundr and potentially use it for ourselves. Idunn, keeper of the Idunn apples.
So we haven't seen Idunn in the God of War series so far, but we have for sure heard of her and her sacred apples in God of War 2018. During our travels with Kratos and Atreus, we come across several of these apples within many chests hidden around the realms. These apples increase Kratos' health when you collect 3 of them, but who exactly is Idunn? Idunn in Norse mythology is the goddess of immortality and the guardian of the golden apples that keep the gods young. The story she's most known for in the mythology is when she loses her sacred apples to the giants. Through the trickery of the trickster god Loki, and with the help of the Jotun named Thiazi, they steal the apples and bring them to Jotunheim along with Idunn. There's a lot of twists and turns in the story, but Loki eventually saves Idunn from Jotunheim by turning into a falcon with the help of Freya's magical cloak and shape-shifting Idunn into the shape of a nut. So what could be Idunn's significance in God of War Ragnarok? From Norse mythology, we get the sense that she's one of the few decent gods in Asgard. So if she were to be in God of War Ragnarok, I imagine she would be an ally to Kratos and Atreus. She might have even defected from the Aesir god tribe and settled down in Jotunheim. And the reason we find so many of her apples in God of War 2018 is because Idunn gave them to Faye so she could place them on Kratos and Atreus' journey. I know there's a lot of maybes in this theory, but we can't deny that Idunn and her apples are an interesting topic we all wish Santa Monica would discuss in God of War Ragnarok.
Hodr, the blind god. Hodr or Hodr is another god that does not make appearance in God of War, at least of yet, and there really isn't a ton of information on him in God of War 2018, but there is a hint that he is a part of the God of War universe, but not from the game itself. In the lost pages of Norse myth, Hodr is actually alive and kicking, even though it's a pretty small mention. In the lost pages, it tells us that Hodr is one of the gods that survives the Aesir and Vanir War, which is actually a pretty good accomplishment because many of the Aesir and Vanir gods did perish during the war. And he was also present while Freyr was set on fire by the Aesir, so, yeah. So in Norse mythology, Hodr or Hodr is actually the twin brother of Baldur, and also Baldur's killer. By accident, of course, and with the help of Loki. So all the gods were having a pretty good time, hanging out, drinking, and throwing stuff at Baldur, which became a pretty common thing because he couldn't feel any pain. He couldn't be hurt by anything. Even the god Thor was known to hit him from time to time. All the gods would laugh at this, even Baldur, because he didn't feel anything. Because his mother in mythology, Frigg, made everything in the realm swear an oath that they would not harm Baldur, except mistletoe. So during this festivity, or whatever you want to call it, Loki, the only living thing that actually hated Baldur, decided Hodr should have some fun as well. Because being the blind god, he couldn't see Baldur to hit him with anything. So the god of mischief decided to help him out with this matter, which was not a good idea. So Loki gave Hodr a mistletoe arrow, and in some sources it was a spear, but either way the result's the same. When hit with the mistletoe, Baldur died. So Hodr in mythology actually plays a much bigger role, and was also killed for killing Baldur by the god of vengeance Vali, who may have just been born for this purpose alone. So if we see Hodr or Hodr in God of War Ragnarok, what should we expect? I actually think Hodr is going to be one awesome boss fight. I believe Hodr will actually act a lot like the character Toph from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Instead of being able to use his sight, he'll be able to use the vibrations from the ground or his touch to see where his opponents are. Hodr is also the god of winter and darkness, so I think this might play a part as well. Maybe even disappear and reappear from the shadows. Heimdall, guardian of Asgard.
Heimdall is an amazing character in pretty much any media he's in. But is he even mentioned in God of War 2018? Actually, he is. When Sindri gives Atreus the mistletoe arrows, he says this.
What are these? Braided mistletoe arrows, straighter than Heimdall and perfectly weighted.
So for Sindri to mention Heimdall at all, it means that he's for sure in the God of War universe. In Norse mythology, Heimdall is the guardian of the Aesir gods and is probably one of the most powerful gods in all the realms, or at least has some of the best powers and abilities. Heimdall requires less sleep than a bird, he can see for hundreds of miles by day or by night, possesses the ability to be aware of events before they happen, and his hearing is so acute that he can hear the grass growing on the ground and the wool growing on sheep. He sits on top of the Bifrost, also known as the Rainbow Bridge, that leads into the realm of Asgard, home of the Aesir gods. During the start of Ragnarok, Heimdall will see Loki leading an army of Jotuns as well as the dead, and he will blow his horn to warn the gods that Ragnarok has begun. During the twilight of the gods, Heimdall will face Loki and they will kill each other as the Norse world burns. So much like the story of Surtur, Heimdall's story is a little dark and bleak. But what will be his role in God of War Ragnarok? I believe Kratos and Atreus will have to fight Heimdall either as they enter or leave Asgard, and this fight is going to be beyond epic. As I mentioned before, Heimdall is top tier when it comes to his godly powers. That's why I can't wait to see him face the god killer himself. But whether Heimdall will have a big or small role in the story remains to be seen. All I'm hoping for is the boss fight, the rest is just gravy.
Hel, goddess of Helheim. Hel is the goddess of the dead and the ruler of the realm of Helheim, which is actually named after her. And since Helheim is named Helheim, we can safely assume Hel is a part of the God of War universe. While she is never mentioned by name in God of War 2018, we have the Jormungandr Shrine which specifically names her, which is right here. This writing on the shrine says it all. When translated, it says, Brother of Fenrir, Hel, and the Iron Wolves. So it is a complete fact that Hel is in the God of War universe, but at this time we still don't know much about her. In Norse mythology, Hel is a child of the god of mischief Loki and the Jotun Angrboda, while also being the sister to Jormungandr and Fenrir. She is the ruler of Helheim, but she did not do this from the beginning. After she was born, she actually lived among the Aesir, but many of the gods in Asgard kinda had a hard time being around her, since half of her was a beautiful woman and the other half more resembled a rotting corpse. So Odin sent her to the realm of the dead to rule over the underworld. There are not many sources left from mythology that actually name Hel. The biggest mention she has is actually in the death of Baldur. Baldur was killed by her father Loki, the only god who couldn't stand him, and was sent to Hel after he died. The Aesir sent the god Hermod to ask to return Baldur to the living because he was the god of light and the most loved god out of all of them. Hel would not let Baldur return to the land of the living unless everything in all the realms would weep for Baldur's absence. And everything did, all except a giantess named Thok, who many believe was Loki in disguise. Having her terms not met, Hel kept Baldur in the realm of Helheim. But what should we see from Hel in God of War Ragnarok? I hope a hell of a lot. So I am hoping that we explore the realm of Helheim much further than we were in God of War 2018, specifically where Mimir tells us never to go. I believe this is where Hel keeps her throne and is surrounded by many monstrosities that live inside the realm, possibly even with Nidhogg, the serpent that gnaws at the root of the world tree. But I also think Hel might be an ally during God of War Ragnarok, since Atreus, aka Loki, is her dad, and Kratos her grandpapa. But you never know, Hel might be bitter at Atreus and Kratos for being stuck in the underworld. So maybe she will be a boss fight so big that it shakes the entire realms after we finish her off. Njord, god of the wind, wealth, and seafaring.
Njord has a very small mention when talking about the God of War universe. On Kratos and Atreus' journey, they come across a small village just north of the Lake of Nine, known for worshipping the chief Vanir god Njord. Njord is a very interesting character when it comes to Norse mythology. Many believe that Njord is the god of the sea and the Norse equivalent to the Greek god Poseidon, which is very understandable. But what if I tell you that he really isn't the god of the sea? Let me explain. Njord's home is obviously in Vanaheim, being the father of both Freyr and Freya, but where he lives is a place called Nuaton, which can be translated to the harbor or boathouse, so his domain is literally on the ships. But power over the sea, well, that belongs to another being entirely. More on that later. But when Njord finally reveals himself in God of War Ragnarok, what are we going to see? Well, I'm thinking that Njord is going to have something that Kratos and Atreus need for their journey. But before they can get this magical item, Kratos and Atreus will have to do something for Njord. My best theory is that Kratos and Atreus will help Njord kill the Aesir god leading an attack in Vanaheim, as lore and legend seems to indicate. Or maybe Kratos will kill Njord. We don't really know what direction Santa Monica will take with this character.
Skadi, goddess of winter, mountains, and hunting. Okay, so this is one of the gods that we actually know a little bit about in the God of War universe. So Skadi, as Mimir tells us, is a giantess that even Faye, one of the Jotun's greatest warriors, admires. Skadi is the goddess of the hunt, and her father, by the name of Thazi, taught her how to hunt each and every animal. She even made a second pair of feet from the ribs of animals so no animal could outrun her, which could be a pair of skis because she is actually the goddess of skis as well, but she might be able to use some type of Jotun magic to literally make a second pair of legs and look more like a centaur, but this is complete speculation. A little later on, she is tricked to kill her own father because he was taking the apples of Idunn in the shape of a hawk, which actually happened in mythology. And of course, Skadi shot her father down. But Mimir tells us that Skadi held her dying father in, quote unquote, an embrace to last an eternity, as the mountains held her. This is easily implied that Skadi held her father until she passed as well. But Mimir also could have said this flat out. So it is still possible that Skadi is still alive, but has not left her father's resting place. So in mythology, like said before, she does kill her father because she was tricked by Odin. So to appease her, the gods decided that she may pick any one of the gods to take as a husband. But, and here's a big but, she could only pick her husband by looking at their feet. After choosing her favorite pair of feet, Giggity, she was hoping that it was the god Balder, because he is the most beautiful and beloved god there is. But it happened to be Njord. And let's just say they weren't a very good match. Skadi lived high up in the mountains, and Njord lived on the beach. They both split times between each other's homes trying to make this relationship work, but sadly, being away from each other's respective homes made them split in the end. So what can we expect from Skadi if we do see her in God of War Ragnarok? Yeah, I think we're gonna have our hands full. As said before, Skadi is the goddess of the hunt, kind of like Artemis is to the Greek pantheon. And being the goddess of the hunt, who better to track Kratos and Atreus down and give them a lot of trouble? I believe we might go further into the mountains to find Skadi because of Njord. Njord might have something that might help Kratos and Atreus on their journey, and maybe Njord sends them to Skadi to help him retrieve something from their marriage. And she will be tough. We will be in her domain, her mountains, her home. She is going to come at us fast, furious, and she will not be alone. Like said before, this is where I think we will find the Berserker stag that we see in the God of War Ragnarok trailer, and many other creatures that she might keep by her side. Sif, Thor's wife.
So it turns out that Sif and Heimdall are very similar when it comes to the recognition they get in God of War 2018. They are only mentioned once, and lo and behold, she is mentioned by a dwarf. But this time, it is Brock that mentions her. Yeah, I will let you decipher that statement for yourselves. In Norse mythology, Sif is the goddess that is associated with the earth, also the wife of the thunder god Thor, and the mother of the goddess Thrudd and the god Ullr. These deities share a mother but not a father. The most popular story of Sif in mythology is the one that deals with the creation of Mjolnir. One day, Loki was bored or just wanted to cause some mischief, so he decided to cut off all of Sif's hair, who is known to have long and beautiful golden hair. And when Thor found out, he was beyond angry and almost killed Loki right then and there. But as usual, Loki talked his way out of it and told Thor that he would find an even better hair for Sif. So Loki went running to the dwarves to make gifts for the gods, and that is a short version of how the gods got some of their most memorable weapons and items. These items include Odin's spear, Thor's Mjolnir, as well as Sif's new golden hair. So with all of this in mind, what can we expect from Sif in God of War Ragnarok? Well, to be honest, I'm not quite sure. There are not that many stories where she plays more than a passing role, and there's only one mention of her in God of War 2018. But for some reason, I imagine her as a formidable warrior who we will face around the middle point of the story. But deep down, I really don't know if she will have a role in the next game. So I'll leave it to you guys. What do you think we can expect from Sif during God of War Ragnarok? Leave your answers in the comment section below, and let's figure this thing out.
Thrudd, Thor's daughter. So Thrudd is a very mysterious character in the God of War universe because she is not even mentioned. So how can she be on this list? Yes, it is true she is not mentioned by name in God of War 2018, but she is hinted to quite heavily by Sindri right around the time that we fight Magni and Modi. And Sindri says this.
Thor's their dad, different moms, sordid story that one. Balder's their uncle, Odin, dear old grandpa, oh, and a sister named...
Weapons. How do they fight?
So Thor does have a daughter in the God of War universe. So just like in God of War, Thrudd in mythology is the daughter of the thunder god Thor and the goddess Sif. Not a whole lot is known about Thrudd from the remaining sagas that we have from history, but we do know that her name can be translated to strength, so we can safely assume that she's really strong. And there are some contradictions between the sagas as well, because Thrudd is the name of a Valkyrie that serves booze to the dead warriors in Valhalla. But in God of War, both of these can be true. And if she is an enemy in God of War Ragnarok, how is she going to stack up against Kratos, since both of them in mythology are the personifications of strength? So is Thrudd just as strong as Kratos? I mean, maybe, but she also might be an ally in God of War Ragnarok. Being the daughter of Thor and possibly even a Valkyrie, she might see the way that Thor almost completely annihilates the entire race of the Jotun and wants to make things right. She very well might be Kratos and Atreus' newest ally, besides Tyr of course, but we all have to wait until God of War Ragnarok finally releases.
Now before we get to number 1, we felt it was necessary to mention some other really cool gods in Norse mythology that might have something to say in the next game. First is Vidar, who's responsible for killing Fenrir with his powerful shoe. Maybe this shoe could be a secondary weapon alongside Mjolnir. There's also Nanna, who's the wife of Baldur in Norse mythology. Although in the God of War universe, I imagine this guy wasn't married to anyone. Maybe the death of her crush could be the reason she gets entangled in the God of War universe. I don't know. We also have Mani and Sol, the gods responsible for pulling the sun and the moon with their chariots. But given that their fate is to be eaten by Skoll and Hati and thus starting Ragnarok, I doubt Kratos and Atreus will intentionally harm them in any way. But they will most likely get to witness their end as Ragnarok begins. Another set of important gods we might see is Vili and Ve, Odin's brothers. Perhaps they could serve as a dual boss fight protecting Odin's throne room in Asgard. And finally there's Ullr, a god that not much is known about, but something that stands out from his description is that he gets around in skis. I don't want him to be a boss, I don't even want him to be an ally. All I want is for Kratos and Atreus to look in the distance and see someone skiing down a hill. That's all I want. But with that said, I'm gonna pass it back to Shayne.
Aegir, god of the sea. Okay, I know we're all excited to see Thor, Tyr, Odin, and many other gods in between when God of War Ragnarok finally comes out. But I am super excited to see Aegir in God of War Ragnarok. But some of you are probably scratching your head saying, who the hell is Aegir? Well, do you remember in God of War 2018 when Kratos and Atreus would pick up gold coins from around the Lake of Nine? Well, these pieces of gold are called Aegir's gold and obviously belong to him. So in Norse mythology, Aegir, also referenced as Heller and Gimnir, actually isn't a god, but a Jotun, who is married to the goddess Ran, a goddess that represents the sea just as Aegir does. And Ran is also the personification of death at sea. Together they rule over the waters and have halls just like the Aesir and Vanir. Funny thing is, Ran and Aegir have had the gods and elves dine with them in their halls in mythology. I thought for sure Thor would smash his hammer through Aegir's face for just being a Jotun, but who knows. So Aegir is not mentioned in God of War besides his gold pieces that we find around the Lake of Nine. But there is something in God of War that might be mentioning his 9 daughters that he does have in mythology. And that is the Lake of Nine itself. It is said that the Lake of Nine actually got its name because of the 9 daughters of Aegir. But you could also say it got its name because you can also travel to each of the 9 realms using the realm travel room. But we don't know if the Lake of Nine was the Lake of Nine before or after the realm travel room was created. So what could we see if Aegir is in God of War Ragnarok? Well, I hope we are able to explore his realm of the sea and his halls. I know, most games have awful underwater levels, and it's almost a swear word when you bring it up in video games. But this is God of War, made by the geniuses over at Sony Santa Monica. So exploring Aegir's realm and his halls could be amazing. So who is your favorite god that we might see in God of War Ragnarok? Did we mention them in this video, or did we leave them out? Tell us in the comments section down below, and we may be able to fix these mistakes in another video. And if you have not checked out Kaptain Kuba, I mean, I don't know how you don't know Kaptain Kuba if you like God of War lore and theories, then do yourself a favor and check the link in the description.